find out where the thing's at. But you can't pull something out of the ocean and immediately scream it's a plesiosaur, especially when there's obviously no skeletal similarities between them. And they say that there was a dorsal fin on this thing here that is somewhat visible. This may be some remnant piece of it up here. Apparently it likes to rot and fall off quickly. So when it comes to this stuff, we got to be careful. We can have fun with it, but you can't go around telling everybody that Ed proved that pterosaurs existed 150 years ago. Ed's just giving you information and interesting articles that give us something to think about and hopefully to pursue. And maybe someone's going to find where that pterodactyl is if it's still with us today. So, did man and dinosaurs live together? They may have, and there may be some evidence in the Bible about it too. The word dragon in the scriptures could be referencing these kinds of creatures. If man and dinosaurs are created on day 6 and then lived up to the flood and then got off the ark after the flood, man got off the ark, dinosaurs being a living creature at the time in whom was the breath of life would have gone on the ark, then these creatures could have lived, man should have seen these creatures at the time. There should be examples in the scripture with all the history in there of these creatures. And maybe there is. And in Job, there is what may be a reference to a sauropod type creature. This guy right down here. Now, I'm going to read this passage from Job, and look at this picture here of this guy here that's supposed to be a brontosaurus, but really isn't. Has anybody ever seen this picture before? Yeah? This is the famous Zallinger mural. It's world famous in New Haven, Connecticut. Hardly anybody else has heard of this thing outside of New Haven, Connecticut, but in New Haven, it's world famous. On the campus of Yale University is Peabody Museum. Now, most of you probably heard of Othniel Marsh, right? Famous dinosaur hunter from the 1800s. He was a professor at Yale. He came out west and found all kinds of stuff, including he found a apatosaurus skeleton in Como Bluff, Wyoming, which isn't terribly far from where I live, though there are no more dinosaurs roaming around out there right now, even though Wyoming's pretty remote. He found an apatosaurus skeleton, and then he put a Camarasaurus skull on it that he found elsewhere, and he christened it a brontosaurus. That's where we get the brontosaurus, and that's what's in this picture. Rudolf Zallinger painted this thing from 1943 to 1947, and the actual is 110 feet long and 16 feet tall, and it runs the length of the Great Hall of Reptiles at the Peabody Museum at the Yale campus. If you're ever in New Haven, Connecticut, it's a place worth going. Othniel Marsh found some really cool skeletons, and they're on display in the Great Hall of Reptiles, and it's very impressive to see this painting 110 feet long up on the wall. It's also bogus because it depicts evolutionary history here from the Devonian period all the way up through the end of the Cretaceous. So it starts before the Mesozoic and then goes through the age of the reptiles. But it attempts to show the evolutionary history of these things. And what's interesting is the knowledge of how they thought these big sauropods behaved. Note he's in the water. And you got this T-Rex over here who's eyeing him and maybe would like to make a meal out of him, but literally is afraid of the water and won't go after him. Big, fierce, toothy predator like the T-Rex is afraid of the water. So they thought Brontosaurus, which didn't really exist. In 1975, 2 Yale professors proved that the Brontosaurus was a hoax, that it was actually the Apatosaurus and the Camarasaurus put together to make a new creature, which I guess got Othniel Marsh some brownie points in the world of paleontology. And he's long dead and gone. So now that the fraud's been exposed, he's out of the picture. And an interesting side note. When I was with the Creation Science Association of Mid-America, we did a tour of the Kansas University Natural History Museum, and there's a bunch of dinosaur bones in the basement level. So if you're ever driving through Lawrence, Kansas, it's worth stopping at. One of the things, actually several, but one of the things in particular you'll notice is from a brontosaurus, there's a great big femur. It's about this long, about 12 inches around. And on one of our safaris and tours of that museum, the curator was there, and he let us know what he thought about creationists hanging around his museum. So I asked him how come he had bones in his display cases labeled Brontosaurus when it was shown in 1975 Brontosaurus was a fraud. And he said, well, we all know that. That's not a problem here. I said, well, can you put new cards in there so everybody knows what the bones really are? And let's not perpetuate the fraud. And all they were these little index cards, and someone had done some nice little handwriting on them and wrote Brontosaurus femur and put it in the case. Just nice little index cards. He said, do you know what it costs to redo these displays? So I offered to buy him the index cards. As creationists, we should be helpful, don't you think? We should do what we can to help the pursuit of knowledge. He didn't like that too much, so that didn't go very far at all. And it might even have made the rest of the trip a little bit more difficult through the museum. But the Brontosaurus is another one of those green chickens, an Apatosaurus with a Camarasaurus skull. But they used to think that these creatures were cold-blooded, slow, sluggish, slow-moving, not even able to support their own weight, and that the sauropods like this liked the water. And maybe they're right. Jurassic Park revised it. Remember, Jurassic Park had these creatures that were pretty agile and active? They promoted the idea that the dinosaurs were warm-blooded, therefore very active. If you're warm-blooded, theoretically, well, not theoretically, it is true. You can generate a lot more from food. You can generate a lot more energy for activity, growth, maintenance of the body, so you can be more active if you're warm-blooded. So Jurassic Park says dinosaurs are warm-blooded. That's why you had at the beginning, I think it was a Brachiosaurus at the beginning of the movie that stood up on its hind legs and had his arms up like a dog does when he's begging, and his neck goes way up and eats the stuff off the top of the trees. And that's how you also had that scene where the T-Rex is chasing the Jeep at 35, 40 miles an hour. A cold-blooded creature couldn't run that fast, period. End of story. But a warm-blooded creature might. The thing is, Creation Magazine had an article about T-Rex. If T-Rex was running at 30 miles an hour and tripped and fell, he would hit the ground with the force of 3 or 4 gravities. And what would that do to his chest cavity? Yeah, we would have T-Rex mush at that point. He's not going to go catching any prey. So did T-Rex really run that fast? I tend to think not. And if he did move fast, how could man have gotten rid of Tyrannosaurus if he was a pest? Get him to chase you and trip him. Just stick your foot out, Boom, there he goes. An interesting idea. But is there a sauropod in the Bible? Look at the picture of the Brontosaurus there, which people are now getting back to the cold-blooded view more so in the slow, sluggish creatures than the Jurassic Park view. Listen to the description in Job. Behold now Behemoth, which I made as well as you. He eats grass like an ox. Behold now his strength is in his loins, and his power in the muscles of his belly. He bends his tail like a cedar. Very important line. He bends his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. That speaks of power and a lot of compressed muscles. You could almost see the muscles rippling under the flesh as they move. His bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs are like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways of God. Let his maker bring near his sword. Surely the mountains bring him food. Now that is a line that gets to why I think God put creatures here. If that creature was warm-blooded, to maintain a metabolism of that size, even to move, this guy had to eat a lot of food. He's 30 to 35 tons in bulk. This guy had to be hungry and probably spent a lot of time eating. And note this quote, surely the mountains bring him food. Where's the food for these guys come from? The mountains, the big things, a huge source of food for these guys. I think that's what he's saying here. And all the beasts of the field play there. Under the lotus plants, now look at where he's at in the water here. Under